I think what the US does really good is basically give anything that sounds interesting, give it a chance. So I think we're in Europe, we're way more conservative than they are in the US. So that's what I noticed when I was there for conferences and events, is that when you come to Europe, you present your idea and people will say, well, that sounds interesting, but does it work? And I tell them, well, we have to still develop it. And they say, okay, first develop it and then come back. And in the US, they say, well, that sounds interesting. Let's try if it works. And that's a complete difference, because basically you start creating something that might work and you're willing to fail. That's okay. So the acceptance of failure is way higher, and that makes the opportunity of actually growing the business into something that actually succeeds and becomes really big, way bigger.
I'm not actually too sure why there's a significant difference. America has some absolutely incredible companies, but whether those companies actually create long-term value or wealth internal to those economies, it's not entirely clear. They certainly create a lot of wealth, but they may just create a lot of wealth for a very small number of people. They're incredible companies. They are absolutely changing the world and reducing the cost of doing many things. But I don't necessarily think that just because they've become very large, Europe should necessarily replicate. Because if you think about the number of very large, successful American companies over the last 40 years, it's very, very small. You're only talking Google, Facebook, Amazon, now Uber, before that Microsoft and Apple. And in between that time, there's been thousands and thousands of companies that have just never worked out. And those stories don't get told, and instead we fixate on these very small number of very, very large companies. I think what's really interesting in Europe is small to medium-sized businesses. If you ask anybody what's the most successful economy in Europe, they'll say it's towards the middle, and that country is Germany. And if you ask people what's the most successful part of the German economy, is it large companies, is it very small companies, or is it the companies in the middle? And they'll say it's the companies in the middle. So I'm really interested in how does Europe create more medium-sized and small companies, as opposed to just creating maybe over the next 40 years 10 huge companies. Maybe along the way of trying to create some more small to medium-sized companies, we might create a few of these superstar companies, but I don't think that should be the goal. I think the goal should be much more focused on medium-sized companies, 100, 200 person companies.